Okay, 1.2, multiplying and dividing integers. Let's begin with an activity. Part 1, complete the following chart. 2 times 4 is 8. 2 times 3 is 6. And we're going to keep decreasing by 1 here. So 2 times 2 is 4. And 2 times 1 is 2. And I would just bring it down to 0. So 2 times 0 is 0. Any number multiplied by 0 is equal to 0. But what's the pattern when the products that we notice here, right? We go from 8 to 6 to 4 to 2 to 0. We're decreasing by 2. And I want you to write that down as your note. The product decreases by 2. Okay, so what if we were to continue the table, right? We've gone from 4 to 3 to 2 to 1 to 0 in this column here. What comes after 0, we're going to decrease it by 1 again. We're going to get to -1. So what's the answer to 2 times -1? Well, the pattern of the product is a decrease by 2 every time. So from 0, we're going to decrease it by 2. And that brings us to -2. The next multiplication, 2 times -2, we're going to decrease by 2 following the pattern again, -4. And then decrease it again by 2, get to -6. So when you multiply a positive number, such as 2s that you see here, by a negative number, such as a -1, -2, -3 you see here, the sign of the products are negative. Okay, that's part 1. Part 2, here's this chart. So we know a negative number times a positive number is negative. So when we look at -2 times 3, we get -6. -2 times 2 is just like saying 2 times 2, but you make it negative, so it'll be -4. -2 times 1 is just like 2 times 1, but make it negative, so -2. And then 2 times 0, any number multiplied by 0 is 0. Now look at the pattern. -6 to -4 is increasing by 2. -4 to -2 is increasing by 2. -2 to 0 is increasing by 2, all adding 2, adding 2, adding 2. So if I were to continue the pattern, so from 3 to 2 to 1 to 0, the next number in the pattern is -1. And the product is going to go up by 2, and that will become +2. We're going to keep going, and it's going to increase again by 2, and then increase again by 2. So -2 times -2 is 4. -2 times -3 is +6. So notice that when you multiply a negative number times a negative number, the product is positive. And that's what we are going to write down here for our conclusion. So the summary is, when multiplying or dividing two integers of the same sign, the answer is positive. So positive times positive is positive. A negative times a negative is also a positive. Same thing when you're dividing, positive and a positive. When you multiply or divide two integers of a different sign, the answer is negative. So positive times negative is negative. Negative times positive is negative. The product is negative, as well as the division. The quotient is going to be negative for two integers of a different sign. Okay, in our course, we're going to show multiplication in several different ways. Quite often, we'll use the first one, brackets. So two numbers being multiplied are written in brackets. Or we'll use a multiplication sign. Okay, but that will become less and less as we get into algebra, and I don't want to confuse the variable x with the multiplication sign. And sometimes you'll see in some books, they'll use a dot for multiplication. But we're not going to be really using that here. We'll stick to the first and second one most of the time. Okay, so let's do an example. Let's evaluate the following expressions. So 5 times 2 is 10. Positive times positive is positive. Okay. -5 times 2 is -10. 5 times -2 is also -10. Right? A negative times a positive, doesn't matter the order, it's still -10. And then two negatives here. -5 times -2 is a +10. If we are dividing, okay, 10 divided by -5 would be -2. -10 divided by 5 would be also -2. And 10 divided by, I think I meant this to be positive. So let's write that as positive. So 10 divided by positive 5 would be positive 2. Two positives being divided is a positive. And negative 10 divided by negative 5, two negatives being divided is also positive. Sometimes we're dividing numbers, it's written as a fraction. 10, this says 10 divided by 5, and there's a negative in front. So there's a negative. 10 divided by 5 is 2. So negative 2 is the answer. So just remember, a fraction also means division. Okay? Sometimes we forget that. So here I want you to try yourselves answering these questions. So pause the video, try them out. Hopefully you had a chance to try them out. Here are the answers. So 21, negative 21, negative 21, and positive 21. And that's for the first part. When you're doing division for the next part, we have here negative 3, negative 3, negative 3, and positive 3. Oh, although I think I repeated one of the questions again, and I think I may have meant one of these to be positive. So let's change the answer. Positive divided by positive is positive. Okay, and 21 divided by 3, when you have a negative in front, it's just negative 7. Okay, so we're also going to be working with powers. So here's a good time to introduce them. So powers are used to abbreviate multiplication, because sometimes we have multiply so many things like these 5s, right? 5 times 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 5. Well, that's quite a bit of a writing to do. Instead, we can abbreviate it using powers, like 5 to the power of 9. So powers consist of two parts, a base, such as 5, what's being multiplied repeatedly, and an exponent. How many times are you multiplying that 5? So taking a number like 1 billion, we can express this as 10, 10 times 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 10. It's 9 tens there, okay? Or you could just say, hey, 10 is the one being multiplied, and there's 9 of them, so 10 to the power of 9, okay? In words, we can express this as 10 is said to be raised to the 9th power, or it's 10 to the power of 9. Okay. You can use your calculators to evaluate these powers and get an answer, right? So you look for this key on your calculator. Sometimes you might have to look for this key. Okay, depending on your calculator model, make sure you can find it. If you calculate 2 to the power of 3, for example, the result should be 8. Okay. And a note of caution here, negative 3 squared is not the same as, I should write a negative 3 in brackets squared. Those are two different answers, okay? Two different answers. Why? Because I apply the square to the entire bracket. So it's negative 3 times negative 3, which is positive 9. Whereas here, negative 3 squared, it's bedmass rules, right? Squared exponent applies to the 3. So that's going to be 9, and you multiply by the negative in front, so negative 9. So you have two different answers here, one negative, one positive. Okay, so let's talk about one more thing. When I express 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, or 5 times 5 times 5 times 5, that's called expanded form. You may remember that from elementary school, or maybe not, but here it is, expanded form. Okay, so let's see. Can you recognize powers here? So the first one, 3 to the power of 4. 3 is our base, exponent is 4. So the base is what's being multiplied, 3 times 3 times 3 times 3, and so the exponent tells you how many 3s you have there. So 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 does have a value, okay? And you can write down that value as 81 when you evaluate it on your calculator. 4 to the power of 3, what if you switch the numbers around? Base is now 4, and the exponent is 3. So that's going to be written as 4 times 4 times 4 in expanded form, and that has a numerical answer here, 64. Can your base be a fraction? Absolutely. 1 over 2, and the exponent is 3. So that's like saying 1 over 2 times 1 over 2 times 1 over 2. How do you multiply fractions? We'll get to more of that review, but hey, it's 1 times 1 times 1, and I'll multiply the numerators. And multiply the denominators. 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. So 1, oh, sorry. Yeah, that's right, 8. Okay, and then we have negative 7 squared. So negative 7 is treated as our base. It's everything inside that bracket. 2 is our exponent. So here we have negative 7 times negative 7 in expanded form. And that will be 49. Two negatives make a positive. Okay. Negative 7 without brackets squared means 7 is the base. The exponent is 2. You have 7 times 7. And don't forget the negative in front. And that's negative 49. Okay, do you see now the difference between writing one without the brackets and one with the brackets? Okay. In words, 5th power of 2. So 2 is our base, raised to the 5th power. So 5 is the exponent. So 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, which is 32. Or you can write this as 2 raised to the 5th power. So 2 is the base, 5 is the exponent. Essentially, that's the same thing, just different words. And there's your answer. Okay, so here we have finished multiplying and dividing integers and extending that further into using or understanding powers. Let's work on the exercises and see you in the next lesson.